I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the office and smelled her perfume. Not my wife's perfume, no, this was someone else's, floral, too sweet, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and follows you like guilt. It didn't belong in my space, not in the office I built from the ground up with my own blood and sweat, and yet there it was, lingering in the air like a warning I didn't yet understand. My name's Eric Monroe, I'm 41 years old, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had everything a man could ask for: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, a comfortable life in the suburbs, and a future I was still shaping with my own two hands. I owned a custom furniture company, nothing flashy, nothing that made headlines, but I had contracts with a few luxury home developers, and we were doing well enough that I didn't worry about bills or competition, or at least I didn't until Thomas Leland opened up shop across town. Leland, slick hair, tailored suits, fake charm, the kind of man who shakes your hand with one hand and stabs you with the other. He came out of nowhere, but suddenly he was undercutting my prices, stealing contracts, and showing up at the same industry events where he used to be just a whisper. And the thing is, I didn't even know what he looked like until the day I caught a glimpse of a photo on my wife's phone. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear I wasn't. I'd gotten home early after a supplier canceled last minute, and I saw her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter, face up, and there it was, a message from T, no last name, just a heart emoji and a photo, blurry but unmistakable. It was him, Thomas Leland, sitting at some cafe I didn't recognize, grinning like he knew a secret that would break me. I stared at that photo longer than I should have, longer than made sense, my heart pounding in my ears as a million thoughts rushed through me. I wanted to believe it was innocent, maybe she'd met him through some charity event, maybe it was networking, maybe, but no, deep down, I already knew. I knew from the perfume, from the way she'd been dressing nicer for her yoga classes, from the way she kissed me less often and talked about our future like it was some distant, fuzzy idea instead of something we'd built together. When she came home that night, I tried to play it cool. I asked her about her day. She lied without flinching, said she'd been at a Pilates class then had coffee with her friend Samantha, and I nodded like I believed her, like I hadn't just seen a photo of her with my biggest rival, like my whole life wasn't starting to crumble right there between the stove and the kitchen island. It got worse from there. The contracts started slipping through my fingers like water. Suppliers I'd worked with for years suddenly stopped returning my calls. A key employee quit without notice and left behind a mess I had to clean up personally. I was drowning and I didn't even know who was pulling me under, but I had a feeling that Thomas Leland wasn't just poaching clients, he was poisoning everything I'd built, from the inside out. And I started to wonder, how did he know so much about my operation? How was he beating me to the punch every single time? Unless someone was feeding him information, someone who knew me, knew the business, knew where we were weak, where we were vulnerable. I wish I could say I confronted her right then and there, that I shouted and demanded the truth and stormed out with my dignity intact, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, watching, pretending, gathering pieces like a man doing a puzzle he hopes won't reveal what he already suspects. I checked her phone when I could. I followed her once, just once, and sure enough, she wasn't going to Pilates. She met him at a hotel downtown, and when I saw them walk in together, his hand brushing her back, her laughing like I hadn't heard her laugh in months, I felt something crack inside me, slow and deep, like a foundation splitting beneath a house. That night I sat in my truck for an hour before driving home. I stared at the dashboard, my fingers clenched on the steering wheel, my heart numb, not angry yet, not really, just hollow, betrayed, like a ghost had taken my place in my own life and I was watching someone else live it. I thought about confronting her again, about telling her I knew, but then a darker thought crept in. What if I let her keep lying? What if I watched a little longer? What if I learned exactly how far it went, how much damage they were really doing behind my back? Because if I was going to be ruined, I wasn't going to go down blind. I was going to understand every cut, every betrayal, and maybe, just maybe, I'd figure out how to return the favor. So I started digging, not just into her phone or her schedule, but into him, Thomas Leland, the golden boy of boutique furniture, the man who everyone suddenly adored, and what I found wasn't a saint, far from it. He had skeletons, oh yeah, unpaid debts from his previous venture, a lawsuit that mysteriously vanished when his old partner went bankrupt, and whispers, nothing confirmed, but enough to give me a direction. At the same time, I started leaving little breadcrumbs, small mistakes in the business, false leads, fake supplier negotiations, things that didn't quite add up if you were watching from the outside, and sure enough, within days, Leland started making moves based on that fake intel. And that's when I knew for certain that my wife was the mole, the leak, the traitor sleeping in my bed, whispering my weaknesses to the men who wanted to destroy me. I don't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that I still loved her, in some broken, twisted way. I still wanted to believe she could be saved, that we could be saved, but I also knew that kind of hope was the luxury of men who hadn't already been gutted by the people closest to them. So I made a decision, not all at once, but slowly, like ice forming on a lake. I decided I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I was going to set a trap, and when they walked into it, smiling, smug, convinced they'd won, I'd be the one standing on the other side, watching everything fall apart, only this time, not mine, theirs. And as I sat there that night, alone in the office where her perfume still clung to the air like a ghost, I knew that whatever came next wouldn't be justice, not really, but it would be close enough. And that was good enough for me. The hardest part wasn't knowing she was cheating, it wasn't even watching the business slip through my fingers like dust in a storm. No, the hardest part was pretending everything was fine, waking up beside her every morning and acting like her kiss still meant something, smiling across the dinner table while she texted him under the table. I knew it was him. I knew that smile, that fake little laugh she gave when she thought I wasn't listening, the way she turned slightly away from me like I was just some roommate she didn't want to be rude to. Every day felt like a performance, like I was wearing a mask I couldn't take off, and the more I played along, the more I felt something inside me harden, not break, not crack, but calcify, like a piece of me was slowly turning into stone, and I wasn't even sure I hated her yet, not fully, not completely, but I hated what she was doing to me, what they were doing to me. I started keeping a journal, not because I needed to write down my feelings or anything poetic like that, but because I needed records, dates, times, texts, patterns. I needed evidence, not just for the revenge I was planning but for myself, so I wouldn't lose grip on reality, so I could look back and say, no, you're not crazy, this is real, this is happening. That journal became my second brain. I kept it locked in the bottom drawer of my desk at the office, hidden beneath invoices and scrap papers. I never brought it home, never risked her seeing it. I documented everything, from her appointments to the strange questions she'd ask me about upcoming deals, subtle little things she'd drop into conversation like, are you still working with that supplier in Oregon, or, did that client in Dallas sign yet? And it always sounded casual, like she was just making conversation, but I knew better now, and every time she asked, I'd give her a lie, something small, just off enough to throw them off course. And it worked. God, it worked better than I imagined. Within 3 weeks, Leland's company, Ambrosia Custom Interiors, what a name, put in a bid for a contract I'd already sabotaged from the inside, a fake offer I floated through a friend I trusted like family, and Leland took the bait like a fish who didn't know he was swimming in a barrel. I watched from the sidelines as the deal blew up in his face. The client backed out last minute after discovering the pricing structure had been manipulated, and Leland's name took a small but noticeable hit in the local circles. Nothing career-ending, not yet, but enough to make people raise eyebrows, enough to plant seeds of doubt. And I kept going. I created a fake supplier account, Greenleaf Lumber Co., a company that didn't exist, not really, just a shell with a website and a phone number that redirected to a voicemail I controlled, and sure enough, 2 weeks after I mentioned them to my wife in passing, just loud enough for her to hear while I was on the phone, Leland reached out to them through a contact form, asking for quotes on walnut slabs. I laughed so hard when I heard the voicemail, I had to close the office door just to keep myself from exploding. But it wasn't just about sabotage, not anymore, it was about understanding how deep this betrayal went, how long it had been going on, and most of all, why. So one night, after she fell asleep beside me, I took her phone, not just for messages this time, but for the photos, the emails, the hidden folders. I knew the passcode, of course I did, and what I found made my stomach turn, not just because of what it was, but because of how casual it all looked, like this affair had become part of her routine, like I wasn't even an obstacle, just a leftover piece of her past she hadn't tossed out yet. Photos of the two of them at restaurants, at the lake house he rented last month for a company retreat, selfies, receipts for hotel rooms charged to an account I didn't recognize but traced back to a business card he once dropped at a fundraiser, and the messages. God, the messages were worse than anything, because they weren't even passionate or exciting, they were just cold, strategic, talking about my business like it was a chessboard, like I was a pawn they were slowly cornering. He's stubborn but he trusts me, I'll get the Q3 projections by the weekend. He mentioned a new partnership with Redwood Homes, I'll see what I can find. I think he suspects something, he's been quiet lately. That last one, I read over and over, I think he suspects something, like I was some idiot she couldn't quite read anymore, and it made me sick, not just from betrayal but from how little I seemed to matter to them, like I wasn't even human anymore, just an obstacle, a loose end they hadn't figured out how to cut. I didn't sleep that night, I just sat in the living room, staring out the window, the glow of the neighbor's porch light flickering in the distance, and I made a decision, not just to ruin them, but to make sure they knew exactly what it felt like to be discarded, used, humiliated. I wasn't just going to sabotage his business, I was going to dismantle it, piece by piece, and I was going to do it in a way that left no doubt in his mind who had done it. But first, I needed allies, and there was one person I hadn't talked to in years who suddenly seemed like the perfect call, my old college roommate, James Delaney. He was in cybersecurity now, ran a small firm out of Denver. We hadn't been close in a long time, but when I explained the situation to him in vague terms, a business rival stealing proprietary info through someone close to me, he didn't hesitate. "I'll do what I can," he said, and just like that, the first real weapon in my arsenal was in place. Over the next few weeks, James helped me map out a picture of Leland's digital footprint, public records, tax filings, social media profiles, even internal emails that had been leaked by a disgruntled employee on a forum we barely understood, and what we found painted a beautiful, broken picture. Leland wasn't just a fraud, he was deeply in debt. He'd leveraged nearly everything to launch his new business, including funds from private investors who had Northwest idea how close he was to the edge. That was the moment I knew I had him, because now it wasn't just about outsmarting him, it was about pressure, real, financial pressure, the kind that makes people crack, and once cracks appear, they only grow. I began contacting those investors one by one, not directly, of course, but through anonymous tips, forwarded emails, carefully crafted concerns about how their money was being used, and soon enough, I heard whispers. He was losing confidence, meetings were being cancelled, partners were backing away. And my wife? She didn't suspect a thing, not yet. She still kissed me goodbye in the morning like she hadn't just conspired with my enemy the night before, still wore that perfume that made my stomach twist, still smiled at me with the same mouth that had whispered my business secrets to a man who would have watched me go bankrupt with a glass of scotch in his hand. But the end was coming. I could feel it in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks, that quiet, tense stillness where everything feels too calm, too perfect. And I was done being the fool. They'd betrayed the wrong man. And I was going to make sure they never forgot it. There's a certain silence that comes before people break, not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel in the way they walk, the way they hesitate before answering questions they used to respond to without thinking, and I saw that silence starting to creep into her eyes, into the lines around her mouth when she smiled, and most of all, in the way she avoided looking at me too long, like my gaze might be holding something sharp. At home, everything looked the same dinners, the same TV shows playing in the background, the same goodnight kisses, but it all felt like a stage play now, like we were reading from a script that neither of us believed in anymore. I caught her staring out the window more than usual, lost in thought, her phone clenched in her hand, unread messages lighting up the screen before she quickly flipped it face down on the counter, and I didn't say a word, because the truth was, I didn't need her to admit anything anymore. I already had everything I needed. With James's help, I'd mapped out Leland's entire operation, and it was built on shaky ground, thinner than I ever imagined, fake invoices, clients double-billed, shell companies tied to past lawsuits, a tangled web held together with charisma and cash he didn't have anymore, and I started feeding that web to the right people, regulators, journalists, business blogs hungry for a scandal, and I watched as the walls around him began to tremble. The first crack came when his biggest investor, some real estate magnate from Florida, pulled out of a development deal citing financial inconsistencies. It didn't make headlines, not at first, but it sent a ripple through the industry, and I could feel it in the sudden drop in his company's online engagement, the tighter press releases, the forced optimism in his interviews. At the same time, I played my part to perfection, kept showing up at events, shaking hands, making it seem like I was still bleeding while secretly rebuilding. I reopened talks with a former supplier I'd fallen out with years ago, one I knew Leland couldn't touch because of a past legal dispute, and we struck a deal quietly, under the radar, and just like that, I secured the inventory Leland desperately needed for an upcoming contract he'd promised months ago. He couldn't fulfill it. I could. And when that deal closed, on my terms, with my name in bold print, it was the first public crack in his image, the first time the mask slipped, and I heard from 3 different sources that he lost it during a staff meeting, shouting, pacing, blaming everyone but himself. Meanwhile, at home, she started acting nicer, more attentive, like a woman trying to rebuild something she wasn't sure she still wanted. She started cooking again, leaving little notes in my briefcase like she used to when we first got married. Thinking of you, you've been working so hard, can't wait for this weekend. And every note felt like poison wrapped in paper, because I knew exactly who she was thinking of when she looked away too long. I knew what hard work meant to someone who sold me out in exchange for pillow talk and empty promises. But I didn't confront her, not yet, because the timing wasn't right. I needed the impact, the moment where all the cards hit the table at once, and I was saving that moment for something perfect. It came sooner than I thought. A friend of mine, Amanda, someone I'd known through business circles for years, called me late one night. She sounded unsure, hesitant, like she wasn't even sure if she should be telling me what she knew, but she said she'd been invited to a private dinner at a high-end lounge downtown, some networking thing Leland had arranged for potential investors, and she swore she saw my wife there, not sitting quietly in the corner or standing near the exit, but front and center, laughing, drinking, and holding Leland's arm like she belonged there. She wasn't hiding it, Eric, Amanda said quietly. She looked proud to be with him, like it was normal. I don't remember how I responded. I don't even remember hanging up the phone. I just sat there on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, her perfume still lingering in the air from the moment she left the house earlier that evening, and all I could think was, this is it. This is what betrayal looks like when it stops pretending. This is the final nail. And so I started preparing for the end. I compiled everything, screenshots, financial reports, the chain of emails, text messages, photos, voice recordings, copies of contracts that showed how Leland had used inside knowledge to underbid me on projects he shouldn't have known about, and I created a dossier, printed, bound, labeled, and addressed it to 3 different people, the local business bureau, a financial journalist I'd worked with before, and Leland's largest remaining investor, a firm out of Chicago that specialized in private equity for mid-size companies. I didn't send them immediately. I held them in my office drawer for one more night, just to give myself space to breathe, to think, to consider if there was a version of this where I didn't pull the trigger, where I walked away, started fresh, left them to rot in their own mess without lifting a finger. But the moment she walked through the door that night, hair perfect, lipstick freshly applied, a spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months, I knew I couldn't walk away, not without them feeling what I felt, not without balance. "Sorry I'm late," she said, setting her purse down. "Traffic was awful." I smiled, nodded, didn't say a word, and she kissed me on the cheek like everything was fine, like there weren't flames waiting to be lit just under the surface of our lives. The next morning, I mailed the dossier. And 2 days later, it started. The first article hit a local business journal, detailing Leland's financial inconsistencies, anonymous sources, speculation about fraud, nothing definitive, but enough to shake the tree, and the fallout was immediate. Social media chatter, LinkedIn updates, investors calling for answers, and I knew it was only the beginning. Leland must have known it was me. He had to, because 2 nights later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring, let it go to voicemail, and when I played it back, it was his voice, tight, controlled rage masked in civility. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Eric, but this won't end the way you think it will. People like me don't go down over rumors. I've survived worse." I replayed that message 3 times, then deleted it, smiling for the first time in weeks. Because the truth is, he was wrong. He hadn't survived someone like me yet. And as for my wife, she came home 3 days after the article dropped looking shaken, nervous, the fake warmth gone from her face, and for the first time, she asked me about my day, not out of love, but out of fear. And I told her everything was fine. Because the truth was, things were finally starting to fall into place. And I wasn't done yet. It's strange how quickly fear can change a person, how someone who once held all the cards can start second-guessing every move, every word, like the ground beneath them suddenly turned to ice, and they're afraid to take another step in case it cracks open and swallows them whole. That's how she looked now, my wife, the woman who had betrayed me without hesitation, who had smiled in my face while feeding my business secrets to a man who hated me. She looked like someone trying to pretend everything was fine when her world was quietly falling apart behind her eyes. She hovered around me more now, asking if I needed anything, offering to cook dinner when she hadn't touched a pan in weeks, folding laundry that I'd already folded just to be near me, like she was trying to read me, trying to figure out if I knew, and part of me wanted to scream it at her, to throw her phone across the room and watch her expression collapse, but I didn't, because I wasn't done yet. The article about Leland had started something, but it wasn't enough. No, what I had in mind required one final, undeniable blow, the kind that doesn't just hurt. It defines a person's downfall, the kind they don't walk away from, not in their industry, not in their social circles, not with their reputation intact. And to deliver it properly, I needed to look him in the eye. So I set a meeting. I reached out through a mutual acquaintance, someone who didn't know the full story but owed me enough favors to make the introduction happen. I told him I wanted to bury the hatchet, to make peace, to move forward as professionals, and of course, Leland took the bait, because people like him always believe they're still in control, even when the ground is already cracking beneath their feet. We met at a neutral cafe, high-end, quiet, full of expensive wood and quiet jazz, and when I walked in and saw him sitting there, perfect suit, fake grin, eyes full of calculation. I felt something inside me go cold. "Eric," he said, standing up and offering his hand, "been a while." "Yeah," I replied, shaking it briefly, "figured we should talk face to face, clear the air." We sat, ordered coffee, made small talk, and I let him lead, let him play the role of magnanimous rival, the successful man who'd bested his competition and was now gracious enough to extend a hand. "I know there's been some friction," he said, leaning back in his chair, "but I'm not your enemy, Eric. This business, it's competitive, always has been. Sometimes wires get crossed, egos get bruised, but I think we're better off working with each other than wasting energy trying to destroy one another." I let him talk, let him enjoy the sound of his own voice, and when he finally paused to sip his espresso, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and I said, very quietly, "I know about you and my wife." His hand froze on the cup, just for a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it, that little flinch, and then he recovered, tried to smile. "Eric, I think you've got the wrong idea." "I don't," I said, cutting him off, my voice steady. "I know everything, Leland, the meetings, the messages, the photos, the hotel receipts, the contracts you undercut because she fed you inside information. I know it all." He didn't speak for a few seconds, just sat there, eyes narrowing slightly, the smile gone now, replaced by something colder, harder. "So what now?" he asked, voice lower. "You want an apology? You want me to walk away from my company? What's your angle?" I smiled for the first time in that entire meeting, leaned back in my chair, and said, "I want you to remember this moment, because it's the last time you'll ever think you're the smartest man in the room." And then I stood up and left, didn't wait for a response, didn't need one, because I'd already sent the second wave of dossiers that morning, this time to the IRS, the state licensing board, and the head of a development firm he'd been courting for months. By the end of that week, his company was under official audit, 2 pending contracts were suspended, and one of his key investors released a public statement distancing themselves from him, and the best part? None of it pointed back to me directly, because I'd made sure to cover every track, to act through proxies, to move in shadows just like he and my wife had done behind my back. And speaking of her, the confrontation came 2 nights later. She came home late, again, and this time I was waiting, lights dimmed, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone on the counter in front of me, unlocked, open to a message thread with Leland that ended with, "He's quiet again, it's like he knows something." She froze in the doorway when she saw it, eyes darting from the phone to me and back again, and for a second, I saw panic, real, raw panic, flicker across her face. "Eric." "I can explain," she started, voice trembling. "No," I said calmly, "you can't." She stepped forward, hands shaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this, it wasn't just about him, it was complicated, I felt forgotten, like you stopped seeing me, and he used you," I said sharply, "and you let him. You gave him the blueprint to everything I built, you smiled in my face while you gutted me behind my back, and you didn't stop once to think what it would do to me, to us." She sat down slowly, her breath shaky, eyes wide. "You don't understand, Eric, I thought we were over, I thought you didn't care anymore, and I didn't know how to tell you, and when Leland started paying attention to me." "He paid attention to you because you had access," I snapped, finally raising my voice. "He used you because you were useful, and now that he's drowning, I promise you, he'll let go of you the second you become dead weight." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel pity, not anymore, not after everything she'd done, not after the months of lies and whispered phone calls and carefully timed questions meant to bleed me dry. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. "Are you going to leave me?" I looked at her for a long time, not answering right away, because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted from her anymore, not love, not trust, not even closure. "I'm going to finish what I started," I said quietly, "and when I'm done, you'll know exactly what it feels like to lose everything you helped him steal." She broke down then, head in her hands, sobbing like the weight finally hit her, but I didn't comfort her, I didn't reach out or say anything else, I just stood, walked out of the room, and left her there. Because I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the man she created when she chose to betray me. And I still had one move left to make. I didn't sleep that night, not really, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she cried herself to sleep on the couch downstairs, the silence in the house thicker than ever, like it had weight, like it was pressing down on everything we'd ever built together, only now I knew it had all been hollow for months, maybe longer. I kept thinking about how betrayal doesn't come with a scream, it comes quietly, through little choices people make when they think you're not paying attention, through smiles that mean nothing and secrets whispered into someone else's ear, and by the time you finally see it, it's too late, the damage is already done. The next morning, I woke up early, dressed in silence, walked past her still form on the couch without a word, and left the house before sunrise. There was no use talking now, not until the final card was played, not until every thread unraveled and the truth stood in the light where neither of them could hide. I went to my lawyer's office first, a man named Howard who had been with me since the early days of my business, sharp, calm, and discreet. He didn't ask questions, just listened as I laid everything out, the infidelity, the stolen business information, the financial sabotage, and when I handed him the evidence I'd compiled, his eyes widened. "This is a lot," he said quietly, flipping through the documents. "You realize what this means if you go public with it." "I'm not just going public," I said, voice steady. "I'm pressing charges. I want a full civil suit against Leland for corporate espionage and breach of business ethics, and I want divorce proceedings started by the end of the week." Howard nodded slowly, setting the papers down. "This will get ugly." "It already is," I replied. "I'm just giving it a name." He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. "Are you doing this for justice? Or revenge?" And I smiled, just a little, because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Maybe it was both, maybe it didn't matter, maybe sometimes revenge is justice when the people closest to you are the ones holding the knife. By the afternoon, the first legal notices had been filed, quietly, officially, and my lawyer assured me that by the time Leland received his copy, the press would already be circling, because I'd made sure of that too. I met with the journalist who ran the original article, a woman named Tasha who'd built her reputation on exposing high-level corporate corruption. She was sharp, relentless, and when I gave her the updated files, complete with timelines, recordings, and proof of insider trading, her eyes lit up like a predator spotting fresh blood. "You sure you want this to go wide?" she asked, almost with respect. "Once I publish this, there's no going back for any of you." "That's the point," I said quietly. "Make sure you name names, and don't hold back." The next morning, the story hit. "Sleeping with the Enemy: How a Rising Mogul Sabotaged His Rival with the Help of a Married Insider." The headline exploded across social media, picked up by national outlets within hours, and by noon, Leland's company had shut down all PR communications, their website went into maintenance mode, and sources started leaking that his executive board was meeting behind closed doors. But the most satisfying part? It wasn't the collapse of his image or the panic in his company. It was watching her try to pretend she wasn't drowning right alongside him. She avoided me for most of the day, barely spoke, just moved around the house like a ghost, checking her phone obsessively, reading headlines, watching everything she thought was safe burn down in real time. And finally, just before dinner, she walked into the kitchen where I was standing and said, voice trembling, "What did you do?" I turned to face her slowly, taking in her sunken eyes, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to fold into herself, and I didn't answer right away, just let the silence stretch until she flinched. "I told the truth," I said calmly. "You just didn't expect the truth to be this loud." Her face twisted with anger then, desperation bleeding into every word. "You're destroying both of us, do you get that? You're burning down everything. You think you're going to walk away from this clean?" I took a step toward her, voice low and even. "You chose this the moment you sold me out, the moment you let him use you to get my business from the inside. Don't come crying now because the fire finally reached your feet." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away, didn't deny it either, because at last, there was nothing left to deny. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He made me feel wanted, like I mattered again. Like I wasn't invisible in my own house." And there it was, the excuse, the justification, the tired rationalization that cheaters always cling to, as if their loneliness gave them permission to lie, to destroy, to betray. "I didn't make you invisible," I said, my voice trembling now with something deeper. "You just stopped looking, and instead of fixing that, instead of talking to me, you walked into someone else's arms and told him how to break me, and now you want sympathy. Forgiveness." She didn't answer, couldn't, and I think in that moment, she finally understood what she'd done, not just to me, but to herself, to us, to the life we'd built on a foundation of lies she didn't even try to repair. And the worst part? I didn't feel hate anymore. Just emptiness. Later that week, she moved out, took a suitcase and left the rest behind, didn't tell me where she was going, and I didn't ask. The divorce papers were served 2 days later, and her lawyer reached out asking for a quiet, clean settlement, no alimony, no drama, just a fast break, and I agreed, because I didn't want a single dollar of guilt money, didn't want to owe her anything ever again. As for Leland, his company folded within 3 weeks, the board ousted him, investors withdrew completely, and lawsuits started piling up faster than he could respond. Last I heard, he was under federal investigation for securities fraud, and 3 former employees were testifying against him. And me? I didn't rebuild the same business. I started something new, smaller, leaner, cleaner, something I could control, with partners I trusted and boundaries I wouldn't let anyone cross again, and it's strange, but I felt more at peace in that small office with fewer clients than I ever did when I was trying to build an empire. Because this time, no one was whispering behind my back. No one was selling pieces of me to my enemy. And no one could betray what I didn't give away. Some people say revenge is a poison you drink yourself. Maybe they're right. But me, I think revenge is just the truth finally dressed in armor. And I still had one final thing left to say, just not yet. Not until everything was truly over. People like to imagine that once you've gotten your revenge, there's this clean break, a moment where everything feels resolved, where justice has been served and the world is finally back in balance. But the truth is, revenge doesn't come with closure, it comes with silence, with empty rooms, with echoes of things you can't unhear, and the kind of loneliness that doesn't go away just because the other person is gone. I remember sitting in my office late one night, weeks after everything had unraveled, the lights low, the blinds half-drawn, staring at the city through the glass while the printer behind me churned out contract after contract for the new business I was building, and I thought, what now? I'd exposed them, humiliated them, stripped them of the lies they'd wrapped themselves in, and for a while, it felt powerful, even righteous, like I'd finally taken control back, but now that the dust had settled, all that was left was the weight of what I'd lost. Because I didn't just lose a company, or a wife. I lost the version of myself that believed in people without hesitation. And that kind of loss doesn't go away with headlines or lawsuits. One night, out of nowhere, I got a call, from an unknown number, no voicemail, just a single ring that I ignored, and then another, and another, until finally, against my better judgment, I picked up. It was her. Her voice was soft, almost cautious, like she wasn't sure I'd even listen, and I almost hung up. I almost didn't let her speak, but something in me, curiosity maybe, or a leftover thread of whatever we used to be, kept the line open. "Eric," she said quietly, "I know I don't deserve a second of your time, but I need to tell you something." I didn't say anything, just waited. "I left him," she continued, "not after everything blew up, before that, before the article even hit. I walked away because I realized he never saw me, not really, I was just a way in, a tool, and the moment I wasn't useful, he made sure I knew it." A bitter smile touched my lips, even though she couldn't see it, because I'd warned her that would happen. I'd told her he'd drop her the second she became a liability, and now here she was, confirming what I already knew. "I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness," she added quickly, "I know I don't deserve it, and I'm not even asking you to believe me, but I needed you to hear it from me, not from anyone else." "Why now?" I asked, voice rough, colder than I expected it to be. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said, and she sounded like she meant it, just closure, maybe, or clarity, or I don't know, maybe I just wanted to hear your voice again and remind myself that once, before everything fell apart, we were real. And I couldn't argue with that, not entirely. Because we had been real, once. Before the late nights in the distance, before she started asking questions about my work that weren't for conversation, before Leland crept into our lives like a virus pretending to be a friend. There had been love. But love doesn't survive betrayal, not the kind that cuts this deep. We spoke for a few minutes more, awkward, quiet minutes, like two people staring at the ashes of a house they used to live in, and then I told her I wished her peace, and I meant it, even if I didn't say it warmly. Because peace was the only thing left to give when love had already bled out. A week later, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Important update, internal testimony, Maxwell Leland Holdings." It was from someone anonymous, sent through a secure server, and inside was a voice recording, 2 minutes long, poor audio quality, but unmistakable. It was Leland. He was speaking to someone, pacing, clearly stressed, and in the recording, he admitted to orchestrating the corporate sabotage, admitted to using a source inside Eric's business to gain leverage, admitted to intentionally leaking documents to partners and undercutting deals to drive me to the edge. But more than that, he named names. He mentioned 2 former employees of mine who had been feeding him secondary data, little things that didn't seem suspicious at the time, project timelines, minor cost overruns, budget forecasts, information I never thought was important enough to protect heavily. I sat in my office after listening to that audio 3 times, heart pounding, mind racing, realizing the betrayal had gone deeper than just my wife, that what I'd uncovered was only the surface. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. This was about protecting what I was rebuilding. I sent the audio to my lawyer, who responded in less than 10 minutes with a 1-word reply: massive. Within days, new charges were filed against Leland, not just civil, but criminal, and this time, the federal case was airtight. He had no defense, no backup, and no allies left to shield him, and my lawyer told me I might even be entitled to restitution for damages under federal law. It should have felt like a victory. But it didn't, not exactly. Because every new revelation made the past feel even more rotten, like the house I'd built was infested from the inside long before it collapsed. And I started to wonder, how many more pieces of my life were poisoned without me realizing. One night, I got home late, exhausted, and as I walked through the door, I saw the dining room table still set, untouched, the chairs empty, the silence pressing in like a memory I couldn't escape. I sat down and poured a drink, not to celebrate, not to numb the pain, but just to feel something other than this aching sense of after. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a letter, forwarded through my lawyer, a typed, formal apology, signed by both former employees who'd betrayed me, part of a plea agreement in exchange for cooperation with the investigation against Leland. They wrote that they never meant to cause real harm, that they'd been promised raises, promotions, future positions in Leland's company, and that they believed they were simply passing along harmless information. But I didn't care about their reasons anymore. What mattered was this. I knew who I was again. I wasn't the fool who got blindsided. I wasn't the broken man left behind after his life collapsed. I was the one who stood back up, who clawed his way through the rubble, who faced down liars and thieves and won, not just with anger, but with truth, with precision, with fire that didn't burn me this time. And I realized something else. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the weight that keeps you from moving forward. And I was ready now. Not to forget, but to let go. Because the past had taken enough from me. And I had one last thing left to reclaim. My future. It was strange, how quiet the world became once the noise stopped, once the lawsuits had settled, once the headlines faded, once everyone involved had either disappeared into obscurity or been forced to face the consequences of what they'd done. I used to think that peace would feel like silence, like stillness, like a calm after the storm. But the truth is, peace feels more like space. Room to breathe. Room to rebuild. Room to feel again without constantly looking over your shoulder. My new office was small, just 3 rooms, plain walls, nothing flashy, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was clean, not just physically, but morally, emotionally, spiritually, if that makes sense. Every piece of it had been built from scratch, with people I vetted personally, people who weren't trying to get something from me behind closed doors. There were days I still caught myself looking for shadows that weren't there, waiting for the next betrayal like a soldier flinching at every loud noise, but slowly, those instincts dulled, not because I forgot, but because I'd learned to trust myself again. And that was the real recovery, not learning to trust others, but learning to trust my own judgment, after it had been broken so violently. One afternoon, months after everything ended, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, just my name on the envelope in small, familiar handwriting. I opened it slowly, cautiously, even though I already knew who it was from. It was her. The letter was short, only a few paragraphs, but it was raw in a way I hadn't expected, not rehearsed or polished like the conversations we'd had before, but honest in the way people get when they have nothing left to lose. She wrote that she had started therapy, that she was living alone now, taking time to understand who she really was outside of all the lies and performances, and that the worst part of everything was realizing she had destroyed something beautiful for something that never even existed in the first place. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for contact. She just said thank you, for the years that were good, for loving her when she couldn't even love herself, and for showing her, in the end, that truth still mattered, even when everything else didn't. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not angry. Not broken. Just quiet. Because for the first time since everything had come crashing down, I felt like the past was finally finished. I didn't need to write back. Didn't need to call. Didn't need to reopen anything that had been rightfully closed. Some things are better left in ink and memory. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a local business conference, not because I was some high-powered mogul anymore, but because someone had heard my story, how I lost everything, how I rebuilt, how I refused to stay broken, and they thought people needed to hear it. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to stand on a stage and talk about betrayal and failure like I was proud of it. But then I realized, that's not what the story was about. It was about resilience. About what happens after the worst has already happened. About how you keep going when everything you trusted turns to ash. So I said yes. The room was full, small business owners, entrepreneurs, even a few students, and I told them the truth, not just the version with neat bullet points, but the messy, painful truth. I told them how I'd ignored red flags, how I'd trusted the wrong people, how my silence at home gave space for someone else's voice to creep in. But I also told them how I took back control, how I fought with everything I had, how I learned that revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to take. When I finished, the room was silent. And then someone started clapping. Then another. And another. And I stood there, not as a man who had been cheated on or betrayed or broken, but as a man who had survived. After the talk, a young guy approached me, early 20s, nervous, fidgeting with his lanyard. He said, "My dad lost everything last year in a partnership scam, and he hasn't been the same since. He doesn't even leave the house anymore. But I'm gonna show him your speech." I nodded, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I understood what he meant. Sometimes just knowing someone else made it through is enough to remind you that you can too. Life went on. Slowly, steadily, and better. I started dating again, not seriously, not at first, just coffee, conversation, reminders that connection was still possible without fear hanging over every word. And eventually, I met someone. She wasn't flashy, wasn't dramatic, didn't try to impress me with business knowledge or fake interest in my work. She just listened, asked thoughtful questions, laughed at my stupid jokes, and one night, as we walked through a quiet street after dinner, she asked, "Do you ever think people can really start over?" And I looked at her, this woman who didn't know the whole story yet, who didn't see me as damaged or difficult or dangerous. And I said, "I think starting over isn't about erasing the past, it's about carrying it differently." She smiled. And somehow, that moment felt like the first page of something new. Not a sequel. Not a redo. Just new. The kind of new you earn. And maybe that's the real point of this whole story, not the betrayal, not the revenge, not even the rebuilding. But the fact that I didn't let it define me. I lived through something that could have ruined me. But instead, I learned. I adapted. I got smarter, stronger, quieter where I used to be loud, sharper where I used to be soft. But I didn't lose me. I just found a version of myself that could finally see clearly. So if you're listening to this, and you're in the middle of your own storm, your own betrayal, your own silent unraveling, I want you to know something. You will survive it. You will feel like everything is ending. But it's not the end. It's the breaking point where the old you dies and the new one starts to take shape. And when the dust settles, you'll realize something powerful. They didn't destroy you. They freed you. Because now you know who you are. And there's nothing more dangerous to liars and manipulators than someone who sees through the mask and walks away anyway. That's what I did. And I've never looked back.